Angel's voice, ASMR. No safety in numbers. We are on page 202, I believe. Shay lay on the floor where Nanny's bed had stood. Marco was behind her, spooning her. She'd even let him throw an arm over her side. She felt so cold. Brady drifted in and out of sleep. The doctors came in every hour and checked her IV drip. They would look down at Shay, see her open eyes, and tell her to get some rest. There was nothing she could do. There was nothing she could do now, but she could have done so much before. If only she'd let herself see what had been happening. Why didn't she put things together? Maybe if she'd left Nanny here in the first place, she wouldn't have developed the respiratory distress and wouldn't be sedated and full of tubes and sucking air through a machine. Maybe Preety wouldn't have gotten sick. If I hadn't been so pathetically needy, they would have never come to the mall in the first place. Marco snored and rolled away from her. She felt the cold air tickle her spine. She shifted onto her back, and a twinge of pain ran from her hip down her leg. It was a welcome distraction, the pain. At least she felt something. A white glare blinded her. Lights on. Marco winced at the ceiling. They could have at least made it gradual, he grumbled. Like use a dimmer or something. I think you should write a letter, Shay said. Someone should get on that dimmer situation pronto. Marco rolled onto his side, his face inches from her own. I see we're cheerful as a cheerleader this morning. He pushed himself up and sat cross-legged. What if I offered to buy you a delicious donut? He cocked his head and smiled. He had a nice smile. How about a smoothie? Shay said. She saw no reason to stay at the EMC. She was no use to anyone. Anything you want, he said, standing. He held his hand out to help her up. She pushed herself to her feet and brushed off her camise. I could really use some clean clothes, Shay muttered, noting a tear in the thin fabric. Sure, Marco said, checking his wallet. I think I have enough. Shay gave him a shove. I don't need a sugar daddy. Nanny's purse lay under the metal tray. She dug around for Nanny's wallet and took out her credit card. She only had the one for emergencies. She always did. If Shay's current situation was anything, it was most certainly an emergency. Let's go shopping. They were pretty much alone in the H&M. No one had tried to help them. No salesperson stood behind the register. How about this shirt, Marco asked, holding up a slinky-looking spandex tank. There are strippers with classier get-ups, Shay retorted, pulling out something a bit more her. It was a regular t-shirt, but in a soft cotton knit with a wide neckline to complement her broad shoulders. When she stepped out of the changing room, Marco's face lit up. You're right, he said. That's the right shirt for you. Well, I'll get two, she said. If they were going to be here for a while, she might as well have a change of clothes. She tried on some new jeans and boots. She left her old clothes in the dressing room. She never wanted to see those rags again. Marco seemed perfectly happy watching her flip through the racks, even let her pick out a jacket for him to try on. This would look really great on you, she said, holding it up in front of him. Really great was a definite overstatement of the case, but anything would improve his current look of fresh out of the hamper dishevelment. Marco took the jacket, looked at the price. I don't normally do jackets. You need that jacket, trust me. I have a crazy idea. Let's put on the clothes and just walk out. Part of her was joking, but once said she was surprised by how much she really wanted to do it. Marco looked around like he expected a cop to jump out from between the hangers. Okay, he said. He checked again, then slid the jacket over his shoulders. Shay swallowed the giddiness that bubbled up inside her. She slipped the second shirt over the first, pulled her bag strap over the outfit, and walked casually toward the exit, and Marco followed a few steps behind. Just as they reached the hall, someone shouted from inside the store, "Stop, shoplifters!" Shay sprang forward, running like the earth was opening behind her, ready to suck her down. The world flashed out in a blur of color. Her heart thumped like a fist against her ribs. A laugh started in her gut and burbled out her lips. The first real laugh she'd uttered in days, the first real feeling since Ryan had left, and she was still alive. Marco caught up with her. Damn, you're fast, he said, panting. You owe me a smoothie, she said, swatting him in the face with a tag. viruses with one arm. A girl lay on the roof, howling like a wolf. It's crazy, Marco said. His breath ruffled her hair. He was so close. The darkness crept back in. Crazy, she whispered. The mall speaker squealed to life. Good morning. I finally have some concrete information for you on the security situation. A palpable silence fell over the mall. It has been determined that we have all been exposed to a biological agent. It is a form of the flu virus, and I regret to say the strain of the virus is unlike any we have seen before. To prevent contagion from spreading the surrounding dense population centers, it has been decided that the mall will be quarantined until such time as the virus is deemed to have run its course. I will relay further details as I receive them. Voices began muttering. Shay looked at Marco. He stared at a small television behind the smoothie counter. On its screen was the word outbreak. A woman screamed. A chair clattered to the ground. The announcement continued. If you develop any of the following symptoms, Shay's pulse quickened. More screams. More voices. The announcement was drowned out by the noise. Shay had nowhere to run. A table crashed to the floor. People began to shove past her. The walls closed in on Shay. She couldn't catch her breath, and Marco screamed for her to give him her hand. She looked around. She couldn't see him. There were so many people. A shoulder knocked into her head. She stumbled. Another person shoved her in the back. She fell forward, palms hitting the tiles. She screamed for help. A shoe stabbed her in the back. She tried to crawl for the wall. Someone tripped over her chest, kicking her in the ribs. Tears stung her eyes. She clawed for the safety of the wall. A shoe connected with her temple, and everything went dark. He couldn't explain what had come over him. All these years of staying off the social radar, of protecting himself. He was overwhelmed. When Shay touched him, he wanted to cry. He would do anything for her, but he was so weak he couldn't hold on to her when she needed him, when real danger struck, when he reached for her as the crush of people started stamping towards them. Her fingers slipped away from his grasp. Why wasn't he bigger, stronger? He could have pushed people aside, lifted her up into safety. Why, when the crowds barreled down, didn't they trample him instead of her? After the mob had passed, he found her limp near the window of a leather store. She was unconscious but still alive. He collapsed with relief, feeling her breath upon his cheek. He had to get her to the medical center. They would know what to do. He grabbed Shay's hands and dragged her body onto his back. He needed something to help her hold to him. Glancing into the leather store, he saw a messenger bag with a thick strap, and Marco snatched it from the rack and slung it over his head and tucked the bag part under Shay's butt. The strap held her chest to his. Then he began a stumbling shamble down the corridor. The announcement had transformed the mall, whereas before the mall walkers had seemed dazed and confused. Now they were crazed and focused. Every single one of them wanted out. They wanted out of the mall pronto. People poured out of the stores, pushing against one another as if running a race. Marco could barely keep a straight course as the mob shoved and kicked him out of its way. Forget that he was trying to carry an injured girl, or that they were all in the exact same cataclysm of crap. A crapaclysm. Marco lugged Shay onto the escalator. The escalators were jammed full of people, some riding down on the handrail. Suddenly, the machine made an awful shrieking noise, and Marco smelled burnt rubber. The escalator slammed to a halt, throwing everyone forward. The ones at the bottom of the steps were shoved to the floor. People screamed, then began pushing their way down the steps. They were like ants, climbing over one another to get to the bottom of the escalator, as if there were a prize for being the first off. Marco tried to shield Shay from the worst of the violence, but he had enough trouble walking her down the steps. One careless woman smacked both Shay and Marco in the face with her giant purse as she stumbled, howling down the stairs. In their desperate attempts to reach the exits, people were hanging off the balconies, trying to drop down from one floor to the next. Some climbed down the metal bracket columns that held the whole mall together. One man missed his footings and fell about 20 feet, disappearing into the throng below. Once on the first floor, the people raced for the exits, any exit, even knowing that the doors were blocked by walls of concrete. They rushed toward them. Crowds formed at the end of each of the first floor halls. Marco managed to drag Shay's limp body to the head of the paperclips hallway, where he saw where the place was packed with screaming, terrified mall walkers. The service hall, Marco muttered, and began slogging back along the main corridor. Moving against the flow of the masses, Marco saw those left in their wake, an old lady flat on the rug, reaching for her purse, a screaming child. He felt that fiery rage explode inside him. Even ants out there injured. People sucked. These mall walkers didn't deserve to survive. But then Shay groaned, and Marco felt how much he wanted to help her, and the rage subsided slightly, if only to make room for the tenderness he felt toward Shay. Marco opened the service door and collapsed into the silence of the empty hallway. Echoes of the general chaos in the mall vibrated through the walls, but compared to the main corridor, the clean white service hall was silent as the grave. Shay slumped on the floor behind him, and Marco glanced down the stretch of the hallway. He wasn't sure he had the strength to walk himself that far, let alone carry Shay there, but he had to get her help. Marco hugged Shay's body to him, her arms dragged on the floor as he shifted her torso. With another heaving of strength, Marco managed to get Shay balanced across his spine in a fireman's carry, then put one foot in front of the other, down the concrete. By some miracle, the service door to the paper clips was still open, and Marco stumbled into the stockroom ready to grab the first doctor he saw, but there was no one there. The stockroom had been emptied. Two outsiders stomped through the double doors from the sales floor and began packing the remaining machinery into boxes and loading them into mobile pallets. The strap from the satchel snapped, and Shay slid from his back to the floor. "Please," Marco shouted, grabbing the arm of the nearest one. "My friend needs help." The outsider shrugged him off. "Watch the suit," and he noticed Shay on the floor. "Sorry, kid," he said. "Orders are to lock down. Anyone already exposed has to leave. Quarantine." The guy lugged the last box onto his pallet and pushed the whole thing toward the car wash doorway of the loading dock, and Marco dragged Shay into the stockroom. One of these assholes had to help. "Hey," he shouted as the hazmat suit bustled past. "I need a doctor." The person paused, squeezed Marco's shoulder, and said, "I'm sorry, God help us all." Then he ducked out through the loading dock. Marco stumbled forward through the stockroom's open doors to the curtained maze of the former sales floor. Overflow patients lay on cots in the halls between the curtains, some unconscious, some aware enough to be screaming for help. The hazmat suits acted like they couldn't see them, stepped over them as if they were trash. The suits were following orders. Some ran boxes through the hole cut in the back wall, others pushed past him towards the outside. Marco's shouts for help were lost in the chaos, and then one of the curtained walls parted and out stepped the senator. "Where are my extra stores of Tamiflu?" she yelled as a passing hazmat suit who pointed to the table in the wall. She mumbled something and "Where are my extra stores of Tamiflu?" she yelled as a passing hazmat suit who pointed to the hole in the wall. She mumbled something into a walkie-talkie, then noticed Marco. "How did you get in here?" "Service hall," he said, breathless, grateful. "She needs help." He lifted Shay off his back and laid her down across the chair. The senator gave them a pitying look, then bent her head to the side as if cracking her neck. She touched Shay's forehead. Shay's eyelids fluttered and she moaned. The senator pointed to a plastic crate. Use one of the cold packs in there and wrap it to wherever you feel a bump on her head." Then she bustled off into the stockroom. Marco did as he was told. His brain was too scared to try to rustle up his own thoughts. He poked through the plastic crate until he found a white bag that said instant cold pack. He followed the directions, cracked it, shook it, and felt it become freezing cold against his palms. The sensation brought tears to his eyes. Something that worked as it was supposed to. He touched Shay's beautiful head and felt a goose egg above and behind her right temple. He pressed the cold back to her and she groaned in response. Marco then became aware of a sound like thunder coming from the front of the store. No, not thunder, banging. The crowds were banging on the plywood wall that covered the paper clips. They were going to bust through and storm the medical ward. The two of them would be crushed if they didn't get out of the way. Marco grabbed a roll of gauze, wrapped the ice back to Shay's forehead, and lifted her off the chair. The banging was now mixed with horrible creaking sounds, and the wood was giving way. The cries of the sick became screams as some of the rioters broke through the plywood door and came raging into the curtained maze. Marco dragged Shay as fast as he could, waiting for the ominous break of the glass. Waiting for the ominous sound of breaking glass. Marco dragged Shay as fast as he could, waiting for the ominous sound of breaking glass. That was the signal for when the true chaos would erupt. A security guard with a megaphone began shouting for people to remain calm, and the screams only got louder. Marco stumbled into the stockroom. The senator stood in front of the loading dock, the overhead door of which was closed. Every few seconds the metal rattled. The outsiders were sealing them in. The service hallway was only feet away, and Marco hefted Shay's body and stumbled forward, nearly butting heads with the guard. "Senator," the guard shouted, "we have to seal this door." The senator stared for a heartbeat longer at the loading dock doorway, then she turned, bumping into Marco. It took her a moment to realize he was the person and not some empty box, and then she lifted Shay's other arm and helped Marco carry her onto the service corridor. Just as they crossed the threshold, happened?" Marco asked, incredulous. The senator turned, a sad look on her face. "What would you like me to do? Please tell me. What am I supposed to do?" Marco had no words. The leader of the mall was asking him what to do. Him, Marco, a nobody, a busboy, a kid. The senator shrugging, sighing, then turned away again and disappeared down the hallway. Marco slumped against the wall and slid down, holding Shay to him. Someone banged against the barred service doors and he jumped. Sure, the end was coming for them all, but the bar held. For the moment they were safe. Marco hugged Shay and waited for it all to be over. Lexi lifted Maddie's head and dribbled some water into her mouth. She sputtered, then swallowed. Lexi pulled the face mask back over Maddie's mouth. "I don't know why you're doing this," Maddie said, lying back onto her pillow of sweaters. "But thanks." "You do the same for me," Lexi said, rubbing sanitizer all over her face and her hands. Her skin stung from the endless applications. "I wouldn't," Maddie said. "Isn't that horrible?" "Yes, that is horrible." Maddie grabbed Lexi's ankle. "I'm sorry I was such a bitch the other day, making you do that lap dance and everything." Her blue eyes were ringed and purple, and her hair was plastered against her forehead from having sweated so horribly after her fever broke. Lexi shook off her fingers and smiled. "Yeah, well, now you have all the time in the world to make it up to me." They'd heard the announcement earlier that morning about the quarantine. Maddie's eyes smiled. "I guess I do." When Lexi had arrived yesterday, she found 6 people lying in various states of illness around the floor of Abercrombie. A salesperson who was feeling chilled and achy herself offered to help Lexi and then moved them all into the stockroom in the back if Lexi shared her medicine. Lexi had gratefully agreed. Doors to the service hall. She did not want the riot to come to them. Now the screams sounded further away, but there was still screaming. "Lexi." She had to wait for the person to yell a second time before she believed it. "Dad?" she asked. She ran to the stockroom floor and flicked open the lock. Her father was poking into the racks of clothes. "Dad," she yelled, feeling a rush of relief. He turned and grabbed her, hugging her tight to him. "Thank God," he whispered into her hair. "Ginger said you would be here, and I prayed she was right. I have to get you out of here." In the store, the screaming from the mall was louder. "And go where?" Lexi said. "Stay with me," she said. "It's safe in the stockroom." Her father held her shoulders and looked her in the face. "It's not safe in the stockroom. It's not safe anywhere but the Apple store. The police can protect us there." Lexi pulled away from him. "I can't leave," she said. "There are people who need me here." Her father looked at her like he did not know her. "Lex, please," he said. "Can you just listen to me this once?" A tear trickled down her cheek. "Please stay and help me." Dad started to cry too. He nodded. She led him into the stockroom. They began changing the sick people, Arthur the boys, and Lexi the girls. They needed to get them out of their sweat-ridden, germy clothes before they got chilled. 4 of the kids were feeling well enough that they could change themselves. Lexi and her dad just handed them whatever clothes were within arm's reach and a wet cloth. "Here," Lexi said, dropping a long-sleeve tee and a pair of sweats onto Maddie's winter coat blanket. Maddie raised an eyebrow at the offering. "This doesn't even match." "All complaints can be directed to the Department of I don't give a crap." Maddie snorted a laugh that morphed into a fit of coughing. "You're literally killing me." Lexi walked around the shelf to where she'd left the sales lady, and the woman had her face buried in a stack of sweatshirts. "Don't cough on them," Lexi said, putting a hand on the woman's shoulder. "We might need..." The sales lady rolled towards Lexi. Her eyes were open and glassy, and she was dead. It wasn't until her father pulled her away from the body that Lexi realized she was screaming. Dad sat her in a different aisle, then went back to the woman, and Lexi sat stunned, trembling. I thought she was getting better," Lexi mumbled when her father returned. "I swear I thought her fever would break like the others." Her father wiped her skin with sanitizer. "There is nothing you could have done to save her," he said. "We should get all these kids down to the med center." He squeezed her hands. "You don't have to do this alone." Lexi fell forward, hugging him, and let herself cry. Her father ordered her to put on some clean clothes before they moved anyone out of Abercrombie, and Lexi went out into the store, more to clear her head than because she wanted to browse the displays. She found some new jeans, a t-shirt, and a hoodie, and changed into a dark corner. Deciding she could use some new clothes, she headed back towards the stockroom to see what they had in her size. "Hey," a voice shouted. "Hand over the register key." Lexi turned, surprised by the bizarre request, and found herself face to face with a wiry dude wielding what looked like a drill. "Are you kidding me? I don't work here," she said. "I don't have a key." The guy squeezed the drill, and there was a bang, and something whizzed past Lexi. "Give me the frickin' key." The guy's face suddenly changed. "I thought you were alone." He bolted out of the store. Lexi turned. Her father stood in the doorway of the stockroom, red soaked through his shirt near his right shoulder. He stumbled forward. Lexi ran to him. No, she muttered, catching catching him as he sagged to her embrace. Her father touched his shoulder. I think it hit bone, he said. What do I do? Lexi said. Get me to the paper clips, her father said. He tried to push himself, and Lexi shoved her shoulder under his left arm. They lurched out of the Abercrombie. The hall on the second floor was nearly empty, but from the top of the motionless escalator, Lexi saw the crowds, a sea of people raging beneath her. Her father tried to hold his own weight on the railing with his right arm, and red blood came out across his shirt. Just lean on me, Lexi said. They hobbled one step at a time down the escalator, and as they neared the bottom, some kid shoved past Arthur, screaming, "Move it, Grandpa!" Arthur was thrown forward, and Lexi lost her grip on his arm. Her father yelped, fell off the step, then tried to catch himself on the railing. He screamed. Lexi screamed. She dove forward, trying to throw her body beneath him before he fell, but she was too slow. He landed against the stone of the first floor hall. "Dad," she said, kneeling beside him. He groaned. "I think I broke the arm. Catching myself." Lexi heard feet on the escalator. Her father would be trampled if she didn't move him. "We have to get away from here," she said. Her father nodded. He rolled himself over by throwing his hips, and his left arm hung at an odd angle. Lexi pressed her back to her father's, then pushed him up against with her legs, lifting him off the ground. He stumbled forward, grabbing the railing with his right arm and shouting obscenities, and then stood on his own. "Let's go," he whispered. Lexi nodded. Her father lifted his right arm, and Lexi gently pushed against his rib cage, trying to keep from touching the shoulder. In the short hall leading to the paper clips, an enormous number of people were amassed against the exit doors. "There's no way we're getting through that," she said to her dad. He watched for a second. "No, this is good." He drove himself in between the first few people, then looked back at her, wincing. "See, they can hold me up." Lexi shoved into the crowd after him, and they moved slowly through the undulating bodies, being tossed one way, then another, at times being lifted off their feet entirely. It was like swimming, only unpleasant and loud and terrifying. Lexi felt the hot mist of people's breath on her skin like a poison. She tried to hold her breath, but that only made her feel sick. Her father pushed forward every once in a while, barking with pain as someone hit his shoulder or arm. Somehow, after an eternity, they pressed against the plywood of the paperclips barrier. They slipped along the outside of the crowd against the wall to the door, and Lexi had to throw herself back into the throng of eek to open the door, but somehow they both managed to jam themselves into the empty space behind the plywood. The door was slammed shut behind them. Dad tumbled to the floor. Lexi shouted for help, but with all her screaming and shouting, who could hear her? "I'll run in and get someone," she said. Her father nodded. The people began banging on the plywood wall. The beams groaned. "Hurry," he said. Inside, Lexi only saw people on gurneys, coughing, screaming. "No doctors." She yelled for help, flapping open each curtain as she dug through the maze of rooms, but there was no one. The wood groaned louder and snapped. "Dad!" Lexi bolted back towards the entrance. He'd be crushed. She'd have to save him. The wall collapsed, crushed into the glass entryway of the paperclips, and Lexi turned from the spray of shards, throwing her arm over her face and crouched behind the gurney. Then the gurney was on top of her. She screamed with pain. The bed had fallen against her legs just above her knees, tossing the patient who'd been in it onto her back. A wall of curtain fell on top of the pile. Feet trampled the fabric around her, but the bulk of the gurney must have worked to drive the masses of people aside. She wiggled her toes. Her legs must not have been broken. She curled her head down and wrapped her arms over her skull and back. The person on top of her coughed. Luckily, the body lay perpendicular to her, over her butt and head, several feet from her rear. The feet pounded, voices screamed, glass crushed to the floor, and more shouting, more crashing, then less, fewer voices, then only cries and groans of other people buried in the wreckage. Lexi strained against the weight of the gurney, and she could not move. She screamed for help. The only answer was the hacking cough of the dying patient on